welcome back. So today we're going to meet one of the most recognizable and perhaps one of the most misunderstood plants in traditional Western herbalism. So mullein. If you've ever driven down a country road, walked through an open pasture, or wandered along the edge of an old field, there's a very good chance that you've seen that remarkable plant. Now, it's tall, covered with bright yellow flowers, soft silvery green leaves. Once you know what you're looking for, you will always see mullein almost everywhere. But have you ever stopped and asked, why has this plant earned such a respectable place in herbalism? What is it about mullein that has caused generations to harvest it, dry it, prepare it as teas, tinctures, and keep it on their shelf year after year? Today, I don't want to just tell you what mullein has traditionally been used for. I want us to get to know the plant itself, because I truly believe that before you understand an herb, you should understand the actual whole plant, right? So, on that note, let's meet mullein. Every plant has a story. And mullein's story begins long before it was ever found its way into an apothecary. Over the centuries, people have given it many different names. They call it woolly mullein, torch plant, candlewick, hag's taper, shepherd's staff. And I always enjoy learning the common names of herbs, because they often preserve little pieces of history. And if you read the older books, you see these herbs in play. So example, torch plant, candlewick plant, right, tells us something fascinating. Historically, the dried flower stalk was sometimes dipped in wax, tallow, or oil and burned as a torch. Careful if you try to do that now. So imagine that, right? Plant growing quietly in the field was providing light long before electricity ever existed. And again, you can do it today, but you're going to want to stick it in sand, and I recommend it outside. So the history reminds us that people didn't simply look at plants, right? They lived with them. They observed them. They learned from them. One of the things I learned about mullein is it doesn't rush. It's what's known as a biennial, which means it completes its life cycle over 2 years instead of one. So during its first year, you probably wouldn't even notice it unless you knew what you were looking for or happened to be walking through the field, right? So instead of growing tall, it forms a circle of broad leaves close to the ground. It's called a basal rosette. At that stage, the plant is investing all its energy into establishing strong roots and healthy leaves. And it isn't trying to impress anybody, right? They're low. It's preparing, and then during the second year, something remarkable happens, right? Everything that plant has stored into the ground suddenly shoots off into one tall stalk, rises straight through the center, sometimes 4, sometimes even 6 feet tall. I've seen them like incredible out here in the Ozarks. Bright yellow flowers begin opening gradually from the bottom upward through the summer, not all at once, just a few flowers here and there every day. And I think that's kind of unique, right, about mullein. It reminds us, right, that growth doesn't always happen quickly. Sometimes the most remarkable things spend an entire season quietly preparing before anyone notices, right? So let's talk about the part that everybody remembers, right? The leaves. If you've ever touched a mullein leaf, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They're unbelievably soft, almost felt-like in touch. Children can sometimes lovingly call them bunny ears, right? That softness comes from thousands of tiny hairs covering the leaves, and those hairs are called trichomes. And they aren't there simply to make the plant interesting. They actually help the plant survive, right? Those actually help reduce water loss. They reflect some of the intense sunlight. You have to think mullein grows in a lot of barren areas sometimes. They help protect the leaves in dry, open places. Once you understand that, you stop looking at fuzzy leaves as something cute and bunny ears or annoying, depending on how you look at it. And you see an incredible engineering, right? Where this plant is not wasting their energy, right? Every structure of the plant serves a purpose. And then that's a good question to ask, like, why does this plant look this way, right? And so that's a good habit to develop, right? One of the things that fascinates me most about mullein is where it chooses to grow. You don't usually find it tucked away in a lush forest or in a rich garden bed. Instead, you often see it in places that seem forgotten. Old pastures, gravel roads, rocky hillsides, construction sites, it's always popping up there, and disturbed ground. So areas where a large majority of other plants struggle, you will see mullein growing. It's often referred to also as like a pioneer species. It's one of the first plants to reestablish itself after the land has been disturbed. You see a lot of that here in the Ozarks because of all the land stripping they do in some areas. And so I think that's something beautiful, right, about this plant. Mullein doesn't wait for the perfect conditions. It simply grows where it can, right? So this teaches us a lesson. Always pay attention to where the plant is growing, because mullein is incredibly resilient. Roadsides, railroad tracks, industrial areas can expose the plant to contaminants. Remember those lovely roots I was talking about? And a healthy plant isn't always growing in healthy soil. So we want to make sure that we're harvesting from clean locations where the land hasn't been sprayed, hasn't been exposed to heavy traffic or pollution. So now that we've talked and kind of met the plant, let's talk about why it has been respected for so many generations. So if you open 5 different herbal books, you notice something very interesting. The wording might change depending on the author, but one might emphasize one characteristic more than another, but certain themes keep appearing over and over and over again, right? First thing you'll notice is that mullein has a long history, right, associated with respiratory systems. Now, that's a pretty broad statement. The respiratory system isn't just the lungs. It includes your nose, sinuses, throat, voice box, airways, and the lungs. So when herbalists traditionally describe mullein as a respiratory herb, they're talking about supporting the entire body system, not just one organ, right? We're not just the lungs. So one reason mullein has become so well known is because of its relationship with mucus. Throughout herbal literature, references mullein being appreciated when you want to support that body's normal movement and clearance of mucus, right? So that's why it appears in so many respiratory tea blends and tinctures, right? But that's only part of the story. You'll also find herbalists describing it as a soothing herb. Sorry, there was a spider. So it helps with the itchy, dry throats, right? So you'll find it, right, again, supporting natural mucus movement, soothing support, and you'll see those features kind of going time and time again, right? So this is why we want to look at those multiple herbal books, right? Because we see what the different authors are saying, right? What do they consistently agree on, right? And those repeating themes are often where you'll find your strongest traditional understandings of the plant. Another thing that could surprise you about mullein, we don't necessarily focus on one part of the plant with mullein. The leaves are by far the most commonly used, and that's mostly what you see in teas and tinctures. But the flowers have their own story. Herbalists traditionally have infused the flowers in oil for external preparations, right? And the root appears in some herbal literature, although much less frequently. Now, I think that, again, It's kind of cool, right? The more we study, right? The more we learn, the more we study, the more we change our ideas, we understand these plants are not just one-dimensional, right? Different parts of the same plant have been developed different traditional usages over time. And that's another reminder that there's always more to learn. So never stop learning, right? So why does mullein continue to show up on the shelf? I think part of the answer is because it's gentle, approachable, and has a long history of traditional use, right? It's also incredibly versatile. You can use it as a tea, a tincture. The flowers, like I said, are infused in oil. And because it's such a recognizable plant in many parts of the world, it's often one of the first herbs many people learn to identify, right? She stands tall out in the field. Everybody can pick mullein up. So I think it also reminds us something important, right? Plants don't have to be rare to be remarkable. Sometimes the plant grows quietly in an old pasture, has one of the richest histories in herbalism, right? So if you look where mullein grows, how it lives, and why herbalists have appreciated it for centuries, the next question is, well, what is the chemistry of this plant? And that actually plays into your traditional observations as well. I want to show you how understanding a few major groups of the plant's constituents can help make those traditional usage a little bit easier to understand, right? So you don't need to memorize long scientific names. There will be no test later, but I do think it's helpful to understand why herbalists mention these constituents over and over, right? So we all know mucilage comes up in the topic of mullein. If you've ever prepared herbs like marshmallow root, slippery elm, you've probably noticed when they're mixed with water, that mucilage content really comes out. Now, mullein contains mucilage, although in much smaller amounts than marshmallow root and slippery elm. Now, herbalists have appreciated that mucilage because it contributes to soothing qualities. So that's one of the reasons why mullein tea has traditionally been valued, right, when the tissues start to feel irritated. So that's one of the reasons why mullein has such a long history in respiratory herbalism. Then you have saponins. So it's probably the constituent most often associated with mullein. And that word actually comes from the Latin word for soap, funny enough for me, because some of those sapien-rich plants will create a light foam when shaken with water. No, you're not making soap when you brew mullein tea. Let's not start that rumor. It's simply where the name comes from. Traditionally, herbalists have appreciated plants containing the sapiens because of their association with supporting the body's normal handling and movement of mucus, right? Again, we're not saying it cures. It helps the body do what it already does. So this is why you continuously see that part mentioned with mullein. And again, we're not doing magic here, right? It's about the whole chemistry of the plant working together, right? It soothes your throat from all the coughing, and it helps move the mucus out of your body through normal processes. Flavonoids will come up again too, right? We've heard a lot about flavonoids and all the other plants we've discussed, and they're found just about everywhere. Plants produce flavonoids as a part of their own natural biology, and herbalists have appreciated them as one part of the overall chemistry that makes the plant unique, right? So when you start comparing herbs, you'll notice that flavonoids appear again and again and again. So I'm not going to go in much detail because we have talked about them in other videos. Now, one thing I appreciate, right, is herbalism does start to teach you this holistic approach to things. So when I pick up a mullein leaf, I'm not thinking, oh, it's just this or it's just this, right? You start to look at the whole plant. And what is this whole plant doing? Its history, its habitat, its chemistry, the traditional preparations for it. Everything together creates the story of mullein. And I think that's one of the reasons herbalists have continued to respect this plant for centuries. So let's make this practical. I have dried mullein here, and I also have my mullein tincture brewing. So people ask me all the time, which one should I make? And my honest answer is always going to be, it depends on what you want to make. The best way to take an herb, right, guys, is the way that you're going to take it. Of course, making sure you check with your doctor and you don't have any issues. The tea has a very traditional long use because water is excellent at extracting that water-soluble constituents found in mullein, right? That soothing quality. And then, of course, as we all know, just sitting around with a cup of tea. I probably had about 3 myself for different blends today already. Thank goodness there's no caffeine in them. But the tincture, right, alcohol usually extracts that broader range of the plant constituents than that water just can't seem to do alone. And it creates a concentrate, right, that's easy to store on our shelves for long-term use in our apothecary. Neither's better. They're just simply different ways of working with the same plant. Usually with mullein, you like to do a double batch. So I would drain this, add more leaves, and let it sit again. So now we know, so one of the things I appreciate most about this herb, right, is it really doesn't require a complicated preparation, right? If you look back through history, right, tea is going to come up a lot more than tinctures ever did. Leaves are dried, steeped in hot water, and enjoyed as a nice warm, notice I said warm, not hot, herbal infusion. So if you've watched my other videos, you know that the different types of preparations are going to extract different things, right? So we won't go into much detail about that, but the mucilage is very well extracted from water. And then just sitting there with a cup of tea when you don't feel really well either is always very nice. Then the tincture preparation for it, right? That's your concentrated preparation. That's shelf stable, easy to store, convenient if you're on the go and you don't have time to brew tea. It's one of the reasons I enjoy keeping both, right? Somebody might be like, yeah, I got time to take this, but no, I don't. I need to do something quick, right? As I've said time and time again, one is not necessarily better than the other, but because they each have their own place, before you make a cup of tea of mullein, there's one little detail that's actually very worth remembering. Remember those soft leaves we talked about? The tiny hairs that make them feel like velvet are still there when the leaves are dried. If those hairs end up floating in your tea, some people find them irritating. I do. They actually bother my throat, can give me almost a choking sensation. So a simple solution is strain your tea well. A fine mesh strainer works better than those large tea balls, right? Or you can pour your finished tea through an unbleached coffee filter or a piece of cheesecloth. Simple step, but it'll definitely make your tea much more enjoyable. If you're harvesting your mullein, timing does matter. The leaves are generally harvested when they're healthy and vibrant and free from damage. Collect the leaves during the plant's first year or early in the second before that flower stalk takes off. The flowers are a little different. They don't bloom all at once. And so you'll only get a handful of flowers each day. So harvesting flowers often becomes a daily practice during the blooming season. And I always remember where I'm harvesting, right? We're going to make sure that we're not going along roadside sprayed areas or anything that can cause us issues. Choosing those clean growing areas will actually help you in the long term. It does no good to take the herb if you just dump 75 pesticides into your tinctures as well, or teas. I think every herb has something to tell us beyond its traditional usage. And for me, mullein teaches resilience, right? It doesn't demand perfect soil. It doesn't wait for ideal conditions. It quietly grows where it's planted, spends an entire year developing strong roots before most people even know it's there. And then when the time is right, it sends up this incredible flower stalk that's hard to miss, right? And I think there's a lesson to that, not just to herbalists, but for all of us, right? Sometimes our most important growth happens long before anyone can ever see it, right? We're working on our root systems, and when we are ready, we shoot up that stalk for symbolism reasons of here I am now and I am better, right? So I recommend if mullein grows in your area, spend some time with it. Observe the leaves, notice where it's growing, watch the flowers bloom, go out there and count, oh, it bloomed 3 on this side, 2 on this side. It's just interesting to watch these things. If you have dried mullein at home, make yourself a cup of tea. Take a sip before you strain it, and then take a sip after you strain it, right? Pay attention to the aroma, the color, even the textures, right? Open 2 different herbal books. Compare what they say. Don't focus on the differences. Ask yourself, what do these authors agree on? So make sure you have books by different authors. And so it's one of my favorite ways, right? It helps reveal the themes that have been carried out through generations of herbal practices. So to me, it's just very good to kind of see what other people have already agreed on and take a lot of that extra research out. So I hope today's talk helped you see mullein as much more than just another respiratory herb. It's a remarkable plant with a fascinating history, a very unique chemistry, and a very long tradition in herbalism. And I think the more we understand the plants themselves, the more thoughtful we become in how we work with them. If you enjoyed today, let me know in the comments below. Have you ever worked with mullein? Is it your first year? Do you like to let it get really big and run over it with your lawnmower in the yard and make big sounds? I mean, whatever's making it fun. Have you ever made the candlesticks with it? That's kind of an interesting, fun thing to do as well. So there are my thoughts on mullein. So until next time, guys, stay curious, stay rooted, and as always, keep growing in grace.